Welcome to Prison Professors. My name is Michael Santos, and I'm super enthusiastic to prepare another masterclass for members of our community. We reach, through our relationships with the Bureau of Prisons, different departments of corrections, and relationship with platforms like Adovo, we reach about 1 million people in jails and prisons. And the only reason I think that you guys listen to anything I have to say is because I was incarcerated for 26 years. But I always make 3 promises to members of our community. I'm never going to lie to you. I'm never going to ask you to do something I didn't do. And I'm never going to ask anybody to pay me a penny. This is a nonprofit. We're striving to change the system so that more people can build pathways to earning freedom. And we need your help. So I'm always doing the same thing today that I was doing while I was in prison. And that's reaching out to successful business leaders so that I could learn from them and take what I'm learning and sharing it with you by asking those business leaders to volunteer with us. And that's why I'm super enthusiastic to introduce you to Greg Vogle. I'm not going to ask him to name his businesses because he knows we're reaching people in prison. And what's really important is that we learn from him the same way I would have been learning from him. And Greg is also going to collaborate with us in building ongoing lessons that will really just encourage you to start thinking. While I was in prison, I always considered myself to be unemployable. And it's really what I want you to be thinking about. How are you going to emerge with your dignity intact and with opportunities to prosper? So Greg, it's a long introduction to people in prison. I just want to thank you for volunteering with our nonprofit and just for spending time with us today.
Honored to be here. Honored to be here, Michael. Thank you for letting me be a part of this. It's going to be pretty fun.
It's going to be super fun. And maybe we
Yeah.
could start off so that people know that you're a true master by just letting them know the kind of business that you're involved in right now. And I'll just ask some qualifying questions to just demonstrate you are somebody from whom we can all learn.
Yeah. So I'm in the big business acquisition space, and we've been doing this for 26 years now at this point, where we look for what we call diamond in the rough fledgling companies that have a lot of room to grow. They have a lot of room to increase value. Maybe the seller of the business, the owner of the business got the business to a certain point, but they just don't know how to get to the next point. Maybe they want to exit the company, and we help, come in and we lock those companies under contract, typically replace ourselves as a potential new owner of the company, and we create a spread in the middle by solving solutions.
And may I ask, just so our audience gets an idea of the size and scope of businesses you broker, what is the range of businesses with regard to how much they sell for, what their revenues are, that kind of information?
Different ranges. So there's smaller companies we've done a lot, and we don't broker per se. We're more like, think about the real estate space. You would have real estate agents, and that's more like a broker in the business space. And then you have the wholesalers sign the contract to purchase, going out and finding funding to buy the company. And sometimes we've bought some of these companies. Sometimes we bring a partner in to buy the company. But there's all kinds of different price ranges. Some of them, like we're working on one right now that's a price range of about $4 million is what it'll end up exiting for. And we've done tons of them in the $30,000 to $40,000 range. Small little companies, they're making $1,500 a month, 5-year track record. That's like a couple of small apartment units, So all different sizes and shapes, as long as they're really good companies and they have a good track record and great products, we're always open to taking a look.
And could you give us an idea of the size of revenues your company is doing on an annual basis? Say, what do you expect to do in annual revenues, your company?
Our company, over the next 12 months, we are expecting to do close to 6-7 million, somewhere in that range.
So these are what I mean when I say I'm looking for CEOs to come in and bring into prison and help all of us, and I'm one of you, learn what are opportunities. One of the cool things about the business that Greg is talking about is nobody cares if you're a felon. What they care about is, can you bring real value? And I'm going to taking now some micro steps to get there, starting off by asking Greg a series of really questions that are just interesting to me. Most of members of our community have already gone through our course, Preparing for Success After Prison. The preliminary course, these are master classes or Ask Me Anything classes, but you're going to see that the questions that I ask are going to show I didn't come up with any of those concepts and those courses. I just learned from business leaders. And that's what helped me grow. It's what helped me become successful when I got out of prison. And it's what I try to share with as many people as I possibly can. So, Greg, if you could just give us some backstory of where you grew up.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about the earliest stages of your life, adolescence. What kind of student were you?
Yeah.
Let's start right there.
So I grew up in a small town in Ohio called Belleville. It's a tiny little farm town. I learned a lot of very hard work ethic from my father. So we lived on a property free and clear. We didn't have to pay rent, but we had to take care of this 178 acres of land, including farming and mowing and baling hay and all these kind of things. And for that, the owner of the property let us stay there, plus paid my father on the side, and he had a full-time job as a carpenter as well. So growing up on a farm, a lot of work. My dad was all about get out there and get to work, boy. And so we learned, early on that we've got to work a lot and work hard. And I watched my father work a full-time job and come home and take care of our farm and baling hay on the weekends, and just a really hard worker. So that was instilled in me at a very young age. And so by the time I was around 10, I had already had a lot of strong work ethic. And I don't know what happened. I went to school one day, and at the school there was vending machines. So you could get an apple for 10 cents. That probably dates my age, but and so I would, at the beginning of the school day, load up on a couple of apples. I had already bought some packs of candy at the local store. I'd break up the packs into individuals, and kids throughout the days always wanted snacks. And so I had a little side business. I've got an apple for a quarter, piece of candy for a dime, and I made a couple dollars a day, running a little business doing that. And that was kind of my first step into that. But by the time I was 17, 18 years old, 18 years old, I was in high school, lived on my own, and full-time manager at a pizza place. So I'm having to trek myself into school every day. But my desire to complete school was not really there. I didn't have a real lot of ambition for school, for college, or anything along that line. For me, it was always, I want to start a business or some form of fashion. And so I think my first run into a truly starting a business was like Amway. And I remember I joined Amway. I sat my friends down. They laughed at me. I quit. And that was the end of my entrepreneurial journey for that.
Let me ask you a little bit filler in there. So appreciate that you shared with us the importance of a self-directed work ethic, and also the seeds that you started to sow into your pathway of entrepreneurship and business, even acquiring things for a penny and selling them for 5 pennies. It's a great way to earn a few dollars a day, and there are always lessons to be learned in every interaction. But you were also a student. You were young. What kind of student were you in school?
Well, at the earlier years, I was a pretty good student. I got mostly A's and B's. I excelled in, and I felt like I was getting validation from turning in good homework. And so I worked really, really hard, studied, and got good grades. But by the time I got into high school, it wasn't so great. It's mostly because I just didn't care anymore. By the time I had my own place, I was still a senior in high school. I would go into the office at least twice a month. And ask how many more days could I miss school and still graduate? Oh, 20. So I'd take the whole week off. And I did some of that. So I really didn't care at that point. I was going to quit school anyway. And my mom cried because they didn't get to finish high school. So I completed high school to make my mom happy. But at that point, the grades went down the tubes because my heart just wasn't in it anymore. But during younger years, I did pretty good in school. I wasn't a straight A student.
Did you continue with self-directed learning by reading or finding mentors, or how did you develop your skills that you leverage today?
Yeah. So always. And so I was first introduced. I always liked to read, especially history. I always enjoyed reading history, but it wasn't until I was an adult and I had my first child that my wife had come home and said, "Hey, somebody gave me this book, thought you might like it." And it was Zig Ziglar, See You at the Top. And I never knew they made books that were on the I never read a self-development book. I think I was in my early 20s. And so I that was my first run-in with reading a book about how you can become the best version of yourself you could. And at that point, once I finished that book, it's been on a self-development path the entire time. And so I'm heavy on YouTube. I watch hours of video on YouTube every day. I'm constantly learning like a child, like a sponge. Every day I'm learning new marketing techniques, ideas on growing businesses, and how to automate companies. And so I am more involved in learning now, years and years later, than I ever was at that time. There's so many new ways to grow a business or to develop. The more I develop as a person, the more my income develops. So yeah.
Yeah, and that is a really important takeaway for members of our community. It's the reason that I asked the question. Many people in our prison didn't respond well to formal education or the traditional academic environment. But the cool thing we learned from listening to masters like Greg is that it's never too early and never too late to start learning. And you could learn even if I learned in a solitary cell. I spent my first year in solitary confinement, and it was a book that started to change the way that I think. And by changing the way that I think, I changed my life. And that's something that anybody could do. And you don't have to take it from me. You just heard it from a man who's built a business that does $500,000 a month in revenues, on over an annual basis. And the more you think about that, the more you recognize I don't have to wait for the government to change my life or for the prison system to offer me courses. I can pursue this self-directed learning. I could always work to develop my vocabulary. I could always work to develop my writing skills. I could always develop my mindset by reading books. You mentioned Zig Ziglar. What was the name of that book?
See You at the Top.
See You at the Top.
Yeah, that was one of his earlier books. Yeah.
We're going to reference that book in this lesson plan, along with some others. And I will ask Greg, could you give us some ideas of a couple of other books that we could include in our supplemental reading list to this course? But the important takeaway is you could always develop skills like math and critical thinking and communication. And it doesn't matter if you're going to start a career laying bricks, painting buildings, building shacks, welding, metal or whatever, manufacturing, retail. It doesn't matter. Those skills will just accelerate your pathway to success. And that's why I love to learn from leaders. Greg, you told us that you launched that initial foray into business with an Amway career, and it didn't work out. You gave up. What did you do after you gave up the Amway path?
Yeah. So my next path was I had this idea of creating a music store. I've been a guitar player for years, and I love music. So I loved going to the music store and looking at all the guitars. So I had this whole business plan. And I think I was 17 years old, almost 18. And I literally was calling all of the major guitar manufacturers, getting wholesale lists, books that I could order from. And I put together a business plan at 17 years old. And it was going to cost me $250,000 to start this music store. Went to my grandfather. He laughed. I gave up. So I learned early on, at least I was trying, but I also gave up really, really early. But I think the first real rendition where I started getting some success, I was 22 years old, and I loved cars. And so I got really, really good at detailing cars. Like I could get in with a Q-tip and just get into the cracks. And I had studied books because I had a few decent little cars that I really enjoyed as a late teen, early 20s guy, and just keeping them cleaned up and looking shiny and learning what kind of waxes work. And so I remember I used to take weekly walks with my pastor around the lake here in Nashville. And he was talking about, I was telling him about this dream of launching an auto detailing company, a mobile service where I could come to you and work it out. And he connected me with an entrepreneur in town that could help me. And this is going to come back to a really good book, Who Not How by Benjamin Hardy. And I forget his name also, but Benjamin Hardy wrote most of the book anyway. But it was finding a who that can help you get from zero to hero, who can take your idea and help you get there. And his name was Mark Augelli. And Mark had this fax list. This is back in the day when it wasn't a big deal to like fax everybody. So he had every fax number in Nashville. We created a flyer, and he basically would let this machine run all night through your computer. It would send out faxes to all the businesses in Nashville. And I woke up to my phone ringing off the hook, and my business exploded overnight. Without him, I wouldn't have got there. And that's a really important lesson, is it doesn't always have to be you who has to have the knowledge, but there's always someone out there who can help you, who might have access to the customers, who might have access to the knowledge you need, maybe as a partner, to help you take your vision and turn it into something that's viable. But that business did really, really well.
Let me just give a
Yeah.
takeaway there for members of our community who have already gone through our courses, Preparing for Success After Prison and the Straight A Guide courses. What Greg just described are 2 points. One is he when he had the initial idea of launching a guitar business that didn't take off, he started by putting a plan together. He researched, he figured out what was important. He figured out how much was he going to need, and he'd come up with this idea, I'm going to need $250,000. Well, there's pluses and minuses to raising $250,000 for your first business. One, either you're going to take on an enormous amount of debt and responsibility, in which case that can hang over your head for a long period of time. Two, the other option is to sell equity in the company, in which case you're giving away, maybe you're going to get sweat equity and you got to put a valuation on it. But either way, you've got to be developing communication skills, writing skills, math skills to tell the story. That was one takeaway that I got from Greg's story, and I hope that you did as well. The other is that sometimes it doesn't take any money to start a very lucrative business where you have no debt and you own 100% of the company. You just rely on your own expertise as a master. And that's what it sounds like he did when he learned the lesson on, I think it was who and how. But the harder you work on yourself, the easier it's going to be to find other people who will believe in you. And Greg found somebody who believed in him and said, let me help out. And it didn't cost him anything to send flyers out over a fax machine. And as a result, with very little money, he was able to launch a business that proved to be very lucrative, had no debt and no partners. Is that accurate?
Yeah. I mean, and this was 20 something years ago, maybe almost 30 years ago. 28, 27?
Yeah.
No, it was 30 years ago. Yeah. And we were making $2,000 to $3,000 a week. And that was good money for a guy who literally was not even married yet, about to be married. I sold the business not too long after we got married.
So
it barely cost me anything. Yeah.
You just said sold the business. So he just gave us some math. When we tell people in prison, don't think your education is over just because you've got a GED. Okay? You've always got to be learning. He just gave us a couple of metrics. One of them, he was doing $2,000 to $3,000 a week 30 years ago. Okay? Those of you who are quick at math will know that means he did between $100,000 and $150,000 in revenues on that business. And then he told us that he sold the business. So let's see if we can find some more ways to use our simple arithmetic skills and show how relevant they are to understanding business. So we're doing between $100,000 to $150,000, and I assume that was revenues, or was that earnings?
That was revenues, but it was almost pure profit because it was literally just a service.
Okay.
Other than, we had a few employees that were out there helping because we were doing so many cars. It was, but it was still clearing well over 100K a year.
Okay, so awesome story right there for you to learn.
Yep.
But then he sold the business, which eventually leads to a business that he's kind of got related to later, and that's an important data point because what you start today may not necessarily be the business that you do 5 years from now or 10 years now, but hopefully it's related, and so the skills you develop along the way will have relevance.
Exactly.
Could you tell us how you came to terms with selling that auto detail business after it sounds like a relatively short period of time?
Yeah, it was about 2.5 years old. Now I'm going to give two different versions. One is the version I should have taken with the knowledge I have now. One is the one I took when I had zero experience on how to sell a company. The path that I should have taken is to realize that business I could have easily sold for $250,000, $300,000, probably some cash, half cash, half terms. For a service business, it's probably typical, $150,000, 150,000 finance. So I would have had money continue to come in because, I kind of coined the phrase years ago, there's never going to be a bigger payday than the day you sell your business. So if you're working towards building a company, building any business, whether it's an online company, a service business, a bricklaying company, the thought is, how can you go from just being a service business or whatever you've got? How can I document the entire process of this company so that a buyer would be willing, like almost like a McDonald's franchise? Can I hand them a manual? There's a whole operational piece that they can take over and run a business. And if you can do that, there's value to the business you built, which is much more significant than the income that you're making. So the path I would have taken was I would have documented things better. I would have systematized, and I would have sold the business for a couple $100,000. What I did do was sold the business to one of my employees, and I cannot even remember the price we worked out, but it was a payment plan for years and years it would have made. He ran it into the ground, filed bankruptcy. I walked into the court, my attorney walked out, he's filing bankruptcy. I'm like, that was it. All of my money, all of my vans. I didn't know I could spend $20 to file a UCC1 lien against the assets of the business, which was a couple of vans and all the equipment. And so I didn't successfully sell that, but I was determined that I got to learn how to successfully sell a business because of the pain I just experienced.
Well,
So,
but there's an education in that lesson, and one of them is that he'd already built a business that had made him a great living, more than $100,000 a year in income for a couple of years, which is quite a bit of money 30 years ago. It's still money today. But remember, most people that are young, today they're going into college and taking on $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 in student loan debt that hangs over their head for forever. Greg built a business. He got an education in business for free, and it sounds to me like you took that learning experience and leveraged it to build more opportunities. What was
yeah.
the motivation for you to sell the business in the first place? Did you just get burnt out?
Yeah, I got burned out. My first child was just born, and so she just turned 28. So this is 28 years ago, and she was just born a couple months before that, and I was working my tail off, sweating day and night out in the sun, detailing cars, and I just felt like I wanted to do something different. So what was funny is we were moving from one place to the next. A friend from church helped us move, and he was talking about the internet. I'm like, what's the internet? And he was explaining, man, you can have products that people buying and selling your stuff while you sleep. And he was explaining all this stuff. And this is back when the internet was so slow, you could go, cook a meal before a page came up, really slow.
Well, you remember I was in prison during that whole time, so I didn't experience
so you missed
that.
all that. Yeah, you could go on and take a nap, and it took like 5 minutes for a page with a picture to come up. It would go, But I'm like, this internet thing, this is the path I want to take. So between that, my daughter being born, I'm thinking, I want to work from home and sell products on the internet, and make money while I sleep. Like, I want to do that. And so went and bought a computer. And that was the journey of, I got to figure out this internet thing and stop doing auto detailing. And that was what some of the main purpose. Yeah.
So great takeaway there. What you're doing today may not be the same thing you want to do in the weeks, months, years ahead, because life circumstances change. And we always have to be thinking about creating that value. Anytime I listen to a master, this is what's going into my head, right? When I went to prison, the internet didn't exist, and it completely changed the way people did business. It changed Greg's mindset. It changed millions of people's mindset. But Greg had to position himself for success in one area in order to seize opportunities in the next area. And that's a very important data point for people in prison today, because again, the world is changing. The world is changing with artificial intelligence, with cryptocurrency, with biotech, with Web 3.0, and everything is new. And you might not be able to participate on that while you're incarcerated, but you could absolutely develop those fundamental skills that we speak about in all of our courses.
Yep.
Greg, tell us about that career going into the internet and building new income streams.
Yeah. So I just sold the company, thinking I was going to have an income stream so I can go figure out this internet thing. Didn't work out. So I was forced to go to Papa John's Pizza and start delivering pizzas. That was very humbling. But while I was there, I was talking to a buddy who's still friends with me today, all these years later. And he said, yeah, my friend Jim has been trying to build an internet business. He's got a PhD and you guys should talk. So I went and talked with him and he was absolutely brilliant. We sat down, he started teaching me how to build web pages. And this is back in 1997. So I'm early on in this space. Google wasn't around, like none of these things. InfoSeek, all these different search engines were the big ones back then. So we started trying to figure out how do we make money with this thing. So we started building web pages. It was like pulling teeth to get somebody to pay us $500 to do all this work. We started doing search engine optimization. We're trying to sell pagers and long distance. We're trying to do anything we can. And we finally built our first web page, selling these little $3 figurines. I think we sold not even $10 worth. Wasn't really working, but we were learning. We were learning how do people find us on the internet when we put a product up? How do we set up shopping carts and all these types of things? And one day, and this is a really cool story. One day our long distance and pager supplier called us and said, I've got these satellite phones and I'm trying to sell them out of my storefront. We can't sell them. Can you guys sell them? I looked at Jim. I'm like, yeah, we can sell them. I didn't even know what a satellite phone was. So he sent us pictures of everything. And we're like, okay, we can sell this technology. I don't know if people will spend $4,000 on the internet. Like we've never had orders like that. We've never seen anything like that. But we took that old Angel little figurine website, stripped it out, turned it into a satellite phone business, and got listed on Yahoo. And our first order was $14,000. And I knew that, holy smokes, this internet thing is amazing.
Well, let's break that down a little bit. Yeah. So look at what Greg did. In order for somebody to believe in him, Greg first had to invest his own time. These are takeaways that I'm getting from his business.
Yep.
He knew what he wanted to do, and that sounds like to be an entrepreneur, to be in business. And as evidenced by him starting this detailing company with probably no more than less than $1,000 to get that off the ground. Is that right?
Yeah.
And then it was self-funded from there. He had a bad exit that didn't turn out well, but what he didn't do is sit around and cry. He went and got a job at Papa John's Pizza. And that's an important data point. You might be getting out of prison and say, oh, I want to do what Greg does right now. Well, are you willing to do the preparatory work that Greg did? Are you willing to humble yourself and take a minimum wage job where you're going to say, hey, this is not my end game, but it's a path, and I'm willing to put in the work? Then he met somebody who he credits as being very experienced with a PhD and knowledge, and then willing to do the grunt work to learn everything, hundreds of hours for $500 sales of building web pages in 1997. Really a pioneer in the industry and building traffic until people start to recognize him. The harder that Greg worked on himself, the more others were willing to say, maybe we could collaborate. And that was a key point that I heard in listening to Greg, and I hope it's one that you're listening to and learning from as well. You said that it was a satellite company that had a product, and let's just hypothetically say it was a $4,000 end unit. How did you negotiate your own compensation? Did you get were you able to purchase at a discount?
Yeah.
Did you get a commission? How did it work?
Yeah, we had a direct dealer out of Canada. So we started with our local supplier, with a supplier in North Carolina. And then we ended up connecting with a supplier out of Canada who was a major supplier. And we just asked them for their pricing list. It was $2,300 per unit. They retailed for $39.97, $4,000. So yeah, it was a $4,000 product with a $1,700 margin. And we just had no idea.
So there, you may have learned a new word, a $1,700 margin. Okay. Yep. That's important. That is the gross profit that Greg could make if he bought it for 23 and sold it for the 3,900. It's a gross profit. And from that, he can run his business. He could buy advertising or marketing or hire employees or do whatever he had to do, because the ultimate goal is to sell not one and make $1,700, but sell 100 and make a lot more, or 1,000 and make even much more.
Yeah.
So this is really exciting. So this sounds also like a business. Did the manufacturer or the wholesaler, did they finance the purchase, or did you have to pay cash to get it for $2,300?
Yeah, we had to pay cash. So luckily, my business partner, the PhD, he had some money saved up. He was like literally a professor at a university in his 30s who lived like eating beans out of a cans and like saved every bit of his money. So he had a little bit of cash. So he bought a handful of phones. We sold them very, very quickly, and then bought some more and kept doing it that way. So that's how we did it. We didn't really have financing available for that. But so we, at the time, now you can do drop shipping with some suppliers and work out some terms. We didn't know anything about that back then. We just thought we need a handful of these on our shelves. So let's go ahead and order a couple of them.
And so tell us about the storefront that you built for your website. Was it strictly like an e-commerce store where people, a landing
100%.
page, here's a picture of the phone, here's the price, here are the benefits.
Yeah.
And is it all automated where they put their credit card number in, or do they have a phone call?
Exactly. Nope. They could call us, and we did have our phone number on there. We did get a lot of calls because it was expensive. And a lot of times people are saying, well, a satellite phone here, work here, I'm going out to the middle of the Antarctic and we've got to shoot video. Will it work? You know, so we had to understand we had to learn how the technology worked. We read those books through several times. But a lot of times people, when somebody's ordering that much, they wanted to,
and who were your customers? Were they other people that wanted to sell, or were they people that wanted them for their own use?
Own use, yeah. So ultimately, over the time we had that business, and that business is still going, by the way. I ended up exiting, still crushing. They're still same owners, still run the business 20-something years later. But ultimately, like some of our end users are ex-presidents who they were going remote places. This is before cell phones went global. So like we would have the entire presidential cabinet rent like 12 to 15 of these things so they could travel. Like I can name names if you want me to, but several presidents we've shipped these units to as their team was flying out.
You just introduced another term. Did you say in addition to selling, you had a rental business where you would acquire them and rent the units?
Yes.
out?
So we started realizing that people didn't want to buy one all the time. They were like, what would you charge to rent? And so we're like, so we worked out a price. I'm like, wow, if we could rent this thing weekly, it pays for itself in 6 weeks. And so we end up building a rental fleet. And the company ultimately was making over $100,000 a month in profit just on paid for rent phones that were already now paid for at this point that we are renting. And then here's another thing we ended up doing. The airtime on this was like $3 per minute. It's $2.99 a minute. And we would get 25 cents a minute back as a kickback from airtime used. And our supplier said, if you guys had your own airtime billing, we could wholesale you the airtime at $1.40 a minute. So my business partner, the PhD he was, this is Excel in old school days, created a spreadsheet where we could upload all this data and it would print off. It looked like an old Verizon phone bill. And we started out of his basement of his house becoming the airtime provider. So we were buying the airtime at $1.40. We had a whole month to pay. We were charging $3 a minute. And so we would bill for our airtime. We were renting phones. It was a beautiful business. It was like the pioneering days.
What kind of revenues did that business generate, and what kind of profits did it generate once you got it really rolling?
Yeah, it took 3 months before the company was doing about $250,000 a month in sales. And this is in the 90s. That was significant in the 90s.
For those of you who are quick at math, that amounts to about $3 million a year in revenues.
Yeah.
And what was the profit margin on that?
The profit was probably about close to $120,000 a month.
Wow.
Yeah.
So an amazingly profitable business.
Yeah.
And yet it sounds to me like you exited that business. How long did you operate it, and when did you exit?
Yep. We had that business not quite 2 years. And my business partner, so I had back when I owned my auto detailing company, I had met some guys that were kind of mentoring me. They owned a carpet cleaning company. They had really cool chemicals that would clean carpets really fast. And they kind of set me up with this carpet cleaning system for cars that was super fast, super efficient, and the customers were just blown away. So I would buy product from them. And I'd go hang out with them at their office and they would mentor me. But one day they called me and said, yeah, we just sold the carpet cleaning business for like 650,000 and we used a business broker. And I'm going, what's a business broker? Kind of like the internet. What's the internet? Well, yeah, we helped us sell the business and we paid him a 10% commission. And I'm like, well, that sounds really fun. Like helping people buy and sell companies. So now at this point, my focus is I love this business that we have, but I want to learn how to help people buy and sell companies. So I end up selling the business out to my other partner, my 50% ownership to him. It was a low 7-figure number.
But was it cash or was it also, did you have to finance him?
No, I financed it for him. So I had continual income coming in on that business so that I could go spend my time learning this business brokerage business and still have income coming in.
So let's just help our audience understand what Greg just said. Again, another business he built with nothing more than sweat equity, learning and building and creating, investing in himself. In 2 years, they turned this business into a $3 million revenue stream with $120,000 a month in roughly profit. That's 120, 10 is 1.2, roughly 1.4 million in annual profits. He said that he owned 50% of that business, which means about 600,000 or so belonged to him. And then he sold it to his partner, the 50% equity to his partner, and he helped his partner. I said, you don't have to pay me now, pay me out of earnings. Yep. And he said it was a low 7-figure number, so somewhere 1 to 3 million, somewhere in there maybe. And then he said, just pay me every month, which gives Greg residual income that he can count on to go do something else. That's a real serial entrepreneur. Somebody who loves to start something, create value. And the cool thing about this is it didn't require much money. It just required him to invest in himself. And you may not be able to go build businesses right now, but you could absolutely invest in yourself. And so tell us about this journey. Did you take at least this time some cash up front so that you weren't in the same vulnerable position as you were last time?
It was not much. It was 50,000 up front. I worked it out with him. 50,000 and then some payments. I just needed a little bit of a cushion to keep myself in a good place. And to hire the next stage was again, it comes back to that who, not how philosophy that I was mentioning earlier. I knew nothing about brokering businesses. If I tried to figure this out by myself, it would take me years, lots of mistakes. I ended up finding a business broker out of New York, paid him to come to my house for a week. He had 25 years of experience. I wanted everything, his contracts, how you do deals. Like I needed to understand valuations. Like I need you to just pour everything into me. And so I bypassed the learning curve by finding somebody who would help me through that process. So great. What's another takeaway there?
You don't have to master everything on your own. Look what I'm doing. I'm just sitting here asking questions. Fortunately for me, Greg is volunteering with our nonprofit, not doing it for me, but for you, people in jails and prisons across America. The reality, unfortunately, is the job market may not be too friendly to you, but we could always learn from leaders like Greg. And look at what he's doing. He's volunteering his time to share his wisdom. But when he went for it, he paid for it. He found an expert. He paid for that expert's expertise and experience and wisdom and hard knocks. And because he recognized, rather than trying to learn everything on my own, which could take several years, I'll pay this guy a reasonable fee. And what's a reasonable fee? It's whatever both parties agree upon. And jumpstart his business. So just think about that. Always try to surround yourself with smart people and be willing to learn from people who obviously have more experience than you. So after you hired that consultant, tell us about your path.
Yeah, so we ended up running an ad in a local newspaper, become a business broker. And I interviewed a bunch of people in my house, in my family room, got like 10 people that committed. Like, I would like to start part-time, learn to be a business broker. I trained them on what he trained me. I taught him how to go knock on doors. Hi, Mr. Is the business owner here? Yeah, I'm the business owner. Hey, my name's Bill. You ever think about selling your business? And you're surprised that 20% said, yeah, they could either talk now or talk later. And it's like, yeah, I've been thinking about selling this place for quite a while and having conversation, how kind of sales are doing. And they had a contract with them. They signed a contract, and every Friday we had a meeting. They'd come in the door, and I signed up 2 listings this week. Okay. And we'd turn around and run ads in the local newspaper and, try to find a buyer, and we'd help the buyer and seller work the deal in magic, and we got a commission on the deal. It was a great business. We loved it.
So let's break that down a little bit and just say, how does this amazing lesson apply to you? You may be somebody who has a felony background. You may not be able to get a license. You may not even be able to get a job. But as Greg told us in that book by Zig Ziglar, if you could help other people get what they want, you can get everything you want.
Yeah.
And just think about this, right? My father, he was an electrical contractor. He had a lot of trucks. He had a lot of equipment that goes with being an electrical contractor: tools, drills, wrenches, pipe machines, pipe cutting machines, wire pullers, bucket trucks, all this kind of stuff, right? That you need to run the business, but it doesn't have much value unless somebody's going to be in that business. Yeah. But my dad wouldn't have known how to go find a buyer. A guy like you, if you could bring that value and said, hey, you just keep doing your electrical business. Let's get your books and records in order so that it makes sense. Let's come up with a reasonable price that will make you happy. And then let me go pitch it to potential investors, whether it's a group of private equity group that wants to buy, or somebody wants to expand their business. And instead of starting from scratch, they say, let's acquire all this capital. And maybe they do the same kind of thing Greg did, and the owner will finance it as well. But if you could do that, you could earn a great living just from these commissions. And you could incentivize other people to go knock on the doors for you. That's what it sounds like Greg did.
Yeah.
What kind of commissions is typical in this kind of a brokerage business?
Yeah. So I'll give you both sides. Typically about 10%. So when my team would go knock on the doors, and we let's say the business was $500,000, what they want for the business, and we know it's worth $500,000. We would run an ad, put it for sale, have a buyer's interested. We get them all the financials. We'd help negotiate the deal back and forth. We would charge 10%. So once the deal closed, we got a $50,000 commission, and then we would split that with the broker who brought the listing. So they would make $25,000, and the company would keep $25,000.
So on a transaction like that, who actually pays that $50,000 fee? Is it the buyer or the seller, or is it
the seller? Yep, the seller.
Oh, the seller will pay.
Yeah, the seller will pay, but sometimes the buyer might come in and negotiate and say, tell you what, if we can do $450,000, I'm willing to split the commission cost. So you could do that too. But most of the time the seller was more than willing to pay the commission.
Yeah, because you're going through some expense in putting this together. And but the cool thing about it is, look at how amazingly well this type of business can scale. There's no reason you can't have 10 sellers, 10 businesses being sold, in which case you're selling $5 million worth of businesses. So it's super exciting to hear about these kinds of opportunities. You stayed in that brokerage business for how long?
4 years. And at that point I'd brought a partner in to run the operations, and I pretty much handed the keys to him. And he ran that business, I think, until like 6-7 years ago, and then retired and decided to focus on his horse ranch. But the business thrived for a long time, and I made a little bit of money on it for a while, and eventually I just walked away and said, hey, business is yours, man. I'm not even involved. So
a business like that's growing over the course of years, who are the buyers typically? Are they professional investors, or are they just people that want to go into business?
Are you talking about the end businesses that we sold, or the
businesses
itself?
that you sold them to buyers? Who were those buyers? Was it professional investors?
No,
or was
not
it,
at all.
I just want to own a dry cleaner?
Yeah, that exactly. It was, I just want to own a dry cleaner, or a restaurant, or a landscaping company, or it was those type of people. They saw it was a good business.
And did the business sell the metrics? You said that you'd learned how to value businesses. Did you value businesses based on revenues, on earnings, or on assets, or how did you do that?
So it depends on the business. So like an online business, it's mostly going to be focused on earnings, meaning the actual profit of the business. Because you can have a business that did $10 million in sales, but only profited $300,000, it's going to be based on the profit of the company. But brick and mortar companies, which is what we did most of back then, it's going to be a combination of both. So it depends on the sector that it's in, but most of the time it was a combination of the profit of the company plus the value of the asset. So if it was a restaurant, there's a lot of cash tied up into the assets. Whereas a landscaping company, you don't have a lot of assets. You may have $30,000 worth of machines and a truck and some couple of trailers. So it's mostly going to be the bottom line revenue of that. So
super important data point there that I don't know if it's as clear to members of our community as it is to me. And that is, you're really selling what you have on paper. You've got to, if you're going to build a business, start thinking about selling the business in the future, which means you've got to keep very good books and records. Document your customer acquisition strategy, the cost of all of your assets, your inventory, how long it takes to turn over capital, your sales growth month over month or year over year, your expenses. The more detail you could put into fleshing out your business so somebody could read it by flipping pages or reading through a website, right? The more value you're going to bring into the future. And that's just a great lesson that Greg just taught us. So what was next, Greg?
So after that, I got into I just built a couple of websites again. After my non-compete was over on my satellite phone company, we launched another one. We sold that company. It wasn't as big. We built that to a smaller level company. And I'm trying to think what else I built. Oh yeah, I owned a bunch of companies that were selling handheld GPS units back in the day when those were really popular, when those weren't on phones either. So a lot of people going out into the country or going hunting, those little
Garmin, yeah. And that's an important data point too. When you're getting involved in technology, you've got to recognize the world's changing. And just as there was, there didn't used to be a cell phone with Google Maps on it that's free. People used to buy these Garmin things. I mean, when I went to prison, we actually had these things called Thompson maps, where you'd be looking at how are you going to find a road, right? In the old days, right? But now there's technology that's just, you can't imagine using a map every time you get into a car. Right now, life is a little bit different, and that's a really important point, because you might invest in it technology, but then some other bigger, entrenched dominant player like Apple or Google or something like that can completely put you out of business just by offering something for free, because they're looking for eyeballs and stickiness on their app. So you got to be thinking about that. But you eventually transition into brokering businesses to acquiring businesses, which you said at the beginning of this industry. Could you tell us a little bit about how you transitioned into that venture?
Yeah, I just realized that there was a lot of these companies out there. They weren't ready to sell, or they were undervalued. What I call diamond in the rough companies. They just weren't. They were a little bit messy, like you talked about earlier. The books are usually a hodgepodge of a mess. And here's all of our receipts. And at this point, I've built and grown so many online companies at this point, several more in the midst of all this, that I had a knack for seeing what was going to work and what was not going to work. And that's just for me digging and learning and learning and learning and learning. So a lot of times we find a seller or somebody who owns a company who's just frustrated. They own a small company. Maybe it's making $100,000 a year. Let's just say $50,000 a year, a small business. And they've run it for 5 years. And they call me up and like, we just went out. We're just tired of running this thing. I don't even want to deal with the employee that's running it for me anymore. And I think this was like 7 years ago, the first one we did like this model. And how much do you want for the business? $17,000. $17,000. Wow. Okay. So what I did was I started looking into their financials, started looking at the product, really cool product. It was selling cigar cabinets, like $3,000 and $4,000 cigar cabinets for collectors that want to keep all their cigar collection humidity controlled. And a couple of days later, a friend called me and said, "Hey, I'm looking for a small online company." And I did the math. And I'm like, "Well, how much do you want to spend? And how much do you want it to make?" "Well, I got this business over here. It's doing like $50K a year. He wanted to spend $60,000. So I went back to the other guy. I signed a purchase contract to buy it for 17. I put a purchase contract for the guy to sell it for 60, buy it for 60. He sent the 60. I sent the guy his 17. I never put one penny up. I created a $43,000 margin. So that was what you call like flipping a business.
Well,
And
let me just, before you give me that,
yeah,
look at that amazing story he just gave us.
yeah,
And he didn't rob anybody. He was honest. Somebody wanted to exit. He didn't know how to find somebody. Somebody wanted to buy. He didn't know what to buy. By marrying those people together, Greg created enormous value, not only for the buyer, but for the seller and for himself. Think about that kind of business and try and scale that, but continue.
yeah, yeah. So we've continued into that space. And some of the businesses that would come to us, we've had little websites that were making $1,500 to $2,000 a month in profit. That's like a piece of property, right? A small 8-unit apartment complex is doing that, and we could pick these up for $3,000 or $4,000. So we bought a bunch of those and let them cash flow. We hired some people overseas that would run the day-to-day operations and customer service. And so we just let those things cash flow. And sometimes people would come to us and want to buy one. We had them available. But a lot of what we're doing now, focusing on, is like going higher level, like almost like turnaround specialists. So we have a due diligence team. In fact, my head of due diligence has been with me for 13 years. And so our goal is to take what you said earlier, which is like most sellers, they have this pile of a mess. Their financials, it's not sellable as it is. It's not presentable. So we prepare those to be presentable. Either they can pay us as consultants to come in and revamp everything out, build it all out. And our team prepares all their financials and everything, so it's buyer ready. And then we train them and coach them on how to negotiate on their own. Or they'll partner with us to, we'll buy the company under contract and try to find a replacement for us as a buyer in that deal.
Do you ever go and raise capital and raise money from banks or lending institutions, or do you always just try and make the deal work itself?
You just got to make the deal work itself. Yeah.
So this is super inspiring, and I'm so grateful to you, Greg, for sharing this story, not only for sharing the video portion of the story, but volunteering to work and collaborate with me in writing the lesson plan so that we could teach hundreds of thousands of people in jails and prisons, just elaborating on what I learned from you today. But then in addition to that, creating ongoing things where we're going to take these lessons and put it to use and teach people in prison how to continue developing. This has just been so inspiring for me. We try to tell people, you may not be able to go out there and build a business right now, but you could always work on building yourself. So we encourage you to be the CEO of your life. We define how we do that. You'll hear it. You'll read it in the lesson plan where you've got to define success. What is it that you want to accomplish? Create your plan that will take you from where you are to what you want to build. Prioritize decisions so that you know what to do today. Build your tools, tactics, and resources along the way. Make sure that you create accountability metrics to measure your progress. Make sure that you're prepared to adjust as life changes. You can change, but then execute your plan every single day. So be the CEO of your life. That's what this lesson is all about. We got it from a master. Greg, I just want to thank you so much for being a part of our community. You are now a prison professor.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the time. This has been really fun. Thank you, Michael.
And I look forward to developing the lessons with you too. Thanks so much.
Yeah, you too. Thank you, man. Bye-bye.